today I'm wrapping up the three-part series that we started that was requested by church members about how God directly impacts our lives. And so we've traveled through the power of prayer. We've talked about the importance of epiphanies. And today we're going to talk about miracles that we would have in our lives. And so I'll start with a question for everybody. Has anybody here ever experienced a miracle? Just think about that for a minute. Now, I'm not talking about, parting the Red Sea or raising the dead. I'm really talking about the quiet moments in life when your insights have been transformed. You can't really explain where a beautiful insight came from that transformed your life. When someone special in your life comes into that life and you know they came in for a spiritual purpose that you could have never planned. Maybe it's a time when something bad happened to you, but you realize that you were protected in the midst of that. It could have been much worse. For others, maybe it's a time when you've been financially stressed out, and then an unimagined source came through and helped you through it. There are many times in our lives we look at things as a complete failure, and they turn out in hindsight to be spiritual turning points. So all of these are what we would refer to as miracles. But they are different from the ones in the Bible, and I've always been curious about that, how our miracles are different from the ones with Jesus, and why. Why don't we have the miracles that Jesus performed? And then what do miracles play in our lives today? So that's really what I want to talk about. And to get started, we really have to understand what a miracle is. And it's different in different traditions. But in our tradition, a miracle is, first of all, I'll say what it's not. It's never a supernatural spectacle to wow us. That is not a miracle. A miracle is when a heavenly reality breaks into our earthly life and it shows a sign, and that sign serves a purpose. So it's really about the sign. Now here's something fascinating. Jesus never used the word miracle to describe his works. So the Gospels are written in Greek, and in the Gospel of John, he uses a word that translates to signs for miracles, but never miracles. And the other Gospels use a word that would be, from the Greek, would translate to divine power. And the use of the word miracle doesn't appear in Christianity until St. Jerome translates the Bible in Latin in the 4th century. And the word there he's using is a marvelous event. So it's interesting. And, a lot of ministers will quote the Greek and the Hebrew and so forth. I don't usually do that. And please don't think I'm trying to show off because I've got Dean Esterson sitting with me today, that I'm trying to prove that I am a scholar. But I think it's just interesting that that word miracle really, if we're looking at it from the Gospel of John, is really about a sign. And I think that's really the way we can really look at miracles, as more signs. What I think is very important to remember is Jesus is not performing magic tricks. And that's the key. He's not trying to amaze the crowd, but he's trying to point the people to deeper spiritual truth. Each healing is symbolic. Each miracle is symbolic of the transformation, and they held a deeper message about God's kingdom. So Jesus' first miracle was at Cana. You might remember that. And that's where he turns water into wine. So on the surface, that would seem a little odd that God comes in the human form. The first thing he does is he saves a wedding that runs out of wine. A very odd first thing to do, I think, right? If you take it just at the literal level. But when you look at it spiritually and you understand the deeper meaning here, water really represents truth at its basic level of understanding, and wine represents truth when it's infused with love. And that becomes spiritual wisdom. So there's a deeper meaning to the miracle. So, of course, Jesus is using the wedding to announce something new is happening in the world through his presence. Human understanding is moving to a new level through this sign. It's a teaching, and it's a teaching about the very purpose of life. But that doesn't really answer the question, why don't we see dramatic miracles anymore like we saw in Jesus' time? I mean, for example, why aren't pastors, apostles, followers, why aren't we able to raise the dead? Why don't we see that anymore? Whatever happened to that? Well, our tradition, I think, offers a profound answer to that. And that is that humanity has entered into a new spiritual era. We've grown up spiritually. And the lessons of Jesus' 3-year ministry were all signs of a new evolution of humanity. And today we have those signs as lessons to learn from. That's why we read the Gospels every week. But we grow spiritually not from marvelous events that wow us, but from also using our reason, our experience, and deep inner reflection. If we had the ongoing external marvelous events like the miracles of Jesus' day, we'd risk losing our freedom. If today I did raise someone from the dead, you would probably believe we'd have a lot more people in church. We'd have national news stories about it. But the belief that people would have would just be with no choice. They'd have to believe because they'd see it. It would be compulsion. And so it really wouldn't be faith. There would be no longer a choice. And so what we're seeking, what God is seeking through us, is genuine faith that comes through the choice to choose between things. Real faith can't be forced. And God protects our freedom because love can only exist when it's chosen. Jesus actually addressed that himself when he was asked to do some miracle. He said, even if someone rises from the dead, they still won't believe if they're not open to the truth. What he meant that was dramatic, marvelous miracles. It might force someone to believe in that moment, but it really wouldn't last. Over time, we'd rationalize it, we'd explain it away because we didn't have an experience of the transformation that we get from our free will. So that brings us to today, and the miracles are happening, and they're internal. They're transformations in our hearts that play out in the world, and we are playing a part of, hopefully, providing miracles and experiencing miracles. When I think about the miracles in our lives, the first and foremost one that comes to my mind is the one that we forget, and that's our very existence. Right now, your heart is beating. Without your effort, you're not saying beat, heart, beat. You're taking a breath. Without really thinking about it, you don't think about it. Your body heals while you sleep. You have the ability to love, to dream, to create. Every moment of your life is filled with these miracles, and we just call that normal. And then with that miracle comes the miracle of consciousness. And that's the gift that lets us feel love from others. It's the gift to choose truth, and it's the gift of experiencing the presence of God. And then there's another major miracle in our life, and it's really the purpose of our lives, and that's what's called regeneration, which is really just a fancy word for spiritual growth, and it's really the entire purpose of your life. If you've ever wondered what the purpose of life is, you got the answer here today. The purpose of your life is to grow your soul. And that is a miracle. And it happens not just with miraculous one-time moments. It's slow. It's a sacred process. As we love more, we become more wise, and we become more whole. Not a dramatic event, just daily acts of humility, forgiveness, and the choice to love, especially when it's hard. That is water becoming wine, and that is resurrection in each of our lives. When we shift and we see these miracles, we see more of them and more of them. In fact, as we grow spiritually, we begin to see that our frustrations in our life are miracles too, because they're growth opportunities. that very challenging person in your life is your teacher, your spiritual teacher. That relationship that you are in, where you really care about someone deeply, that's your classroom for love. These are miracles. You know that I do this work where I help people overcome the political divide called cultural translation. It's nothing short of a miracle to watch people start at the beginning of a session with bias and animosity and prejudice toward people of different worldviews, and then end with, wow, I can really see the world through their eyes. I see that as a miracle. Another big miracle where I've seen it play out, people have made choices, and we see it play out in science, is in healthcare. Many of you know I've been involved with the AIDS issue, and years ago, drugs came into existence that literally have brought people back to life. We literally saw people that were dying. And do you know what the scientists and the material modern world called that phenomena? They called it the Lazarus effect, right out of Scripture, right out of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So that is another major modern miracle. I've had lots of friends in AA, addiction groups of different types, and I've just seen amazing transformation when they submit themselves to a being greater than themselves, whatever they call that. And that is a resurrection, because addiction can become death. And when you're rising from that, that can be resurrection. Here in church, I see it too, at Church of the Holy City. A few weeks ago, I gave the keynote at our denomination's conference, and I just shared a lot of the stories of particularly the younger members of our church who walked in and got involved, all flukes, pulled muscles, a big question, political disillusionment, or interest in interfaith dialogue, all different reasons. They're all miracles. Each one is a miracle. And as a pastor, I reflect on each of you when you come here each week as a miracle. And I've always said we are small in number, but our impact is beyond what we can imagine if we take on this responsibility to be miracle workers in the world that so desperately needs it. And it's not just people who join on Sunday. What I've discovered now through emails and questions and comments is a lot of people are listening online that never come. They listen to the recording, and that's a miracle too. The fact that we're gathered here today using technology in hybrid worship, again, that's a modern miracle. So these are all miracles. When we start looking, we see them everywhere. And they're all signs. And these signs are all geared toward our spiritual growth. The blind receive sight when new understandings open our mind. The lame walk when we rise from the paralysis of our life. The dead are raised when we move from that zombie existence that dominates our culture right now and has created a whole zombie movie series because people feel like they're zombies. And when their spirit is animated through understanding faith and connecting to God, they're resurrected to new life. So you are mighty in the impact that you're all having around you. You're all miracle makers. And there's always a request, either after the service during the discussion or in weeks later, people say, I liked your sermon, but can you give us some practices? So here's a couple practices that might be helpful for developing that ability to be in touch with your being that miracle worker. And that is, before we're getting up in the morning, just thanking God for the miracle of life and reminding ourselves we only get this for a short time, this experience of life. It's a miracle, and we should be grateful for it. If we start our day with that gratitude, it'll have a huge difference in how we approach the day. And as we end the day, we can say, what hidden miracles did I see today? Was there a kind word? Did a solution come out of nowhere? Was there a moment of peace? Whatever it is for you, you don't have to even write it down, but just acknowledge Acknowledge the beginning of the day that life's a miracle, and at the end of the day, the beautiful thing that happened that day. And I have one more practice for you, and that's an act of anonymous kindness to someone. Right now, there's someone in your life that irritates you, probably. And if you don't have anybody who irritates you, God bless. But how about texting that person and encouraging them, or doing a small, kind act for them? You will probably discover, and may have already discovered, that you're the miracle in other people's lives that they're waiting to happen. When we are opening ourselves to being useful to the Lord can use us to help others in ways we don't really understand, but the people that we are reaching out to have been praying for. I also want to talk about a miracle in our community, which is the book by Natalia, who wrote a book called Be Merciful, 50 Authentic Stories About Miracles of God's Love. And it's a beautiful book. It's on Amazon. And what's great about it is it's just like 3 pages of one little miracle story in someone's life. And it builds you up when you hear the stories of how it transformed people. So Natalia is actually a miracle worker in that book. She has no idea who's going to read it, who's going to be blessed by it. It could be a lovely gift that you could give to people. So in conclusion today, the ongoing miracle of our life is really divine providence. That's God is working toward the good in our life. And as much as we accept that guidance and leadership, we can live a greater life of love and truth. So miracles haven't ended, they've evolved. And the greatest miracle is that ordinary people like you and me, we get to be channels of God's divine love. Changing the world one conversation, one act of kindness, and one prayer at a time. So I invite you to commit over the next 7 days to try that. Start your morning by just saying, thank you for this miracle of life. And then at the end of the day, just either jot down or just a mental note, what miracles did I see today? And I think you'll be stunned. You'll see how it will change your life. You don't have to wait for a miracle. You are the miracle. The miracle isn't somewhere else. It's happening in you. It's here in this room. It's here in our gathering. It's here in small groups of people who still gather and still try to learn and grow. So as you leave today, don't go back to your regular life. Go back as a miracle worker. People who know you will know that your conversation is a chance for water to become wine, and every conflict to be an opportunity for the dead to rise. Every moment to choose love over fear, a place where heaven touches earth. Miracles are signs. You are a sign. What miracle will you be in someone's life today, tomorrow, and this week, and throughout your life? Amen. Okay, miracle workers, as we do each week, we open it up for a discussion. We like to have questions as opposed to second sermons, but if you have a great point to make, that's fine. But any questions or reflections on the message today?
Well, you know me, I'm this Irish person who just has to speak, sorry. But I have to say that, first of all, my greetings to Dr. Esterson, who is there, because actually one of the miracles I would think of in my life is standing in a lobby at one of our conventions with Rebecca and Anna Woofenden, and they are discussing creating the Garden Church in San Pedro. And it happened. And it's 10 years later, and yes,
You wave
it's
your hand. We'll go to there it goes.
Second thing, I am a person who was given 2 choices, and it was dialysis or hospice. And so I chose dialysis. And after about, I don't know, 6 months, they called me and said, you don't have to come here anymore because your kidneys have improved so much. That, my friends, is huge. And thirdly, I have to talk to your sister Carol and say one of the other miracles in my life was learning to be retired. On September 8th of 2001, I tripped and fell at a meeting at the Kitchener Church of the Good Shepherd. And I broke both of my right leg, both of the bones in that leg, and cracked my ankle. I spent a little quality time in Kitchener, Ontario, in a hospital having this all repaired. And then my sister called me and said, please turn on the TV if you have one in your room. And I did. And I watched the second tower being taken down in New York. Alicia Titus was lost in that. She was a stewardess, and Alicia and I had known each other since she was 7. And I, the thing is, it stopped all traffic. I couldn't come home from Canada to the United States. Everything was closed. But the cool thing was that my friend Barb, you'll find her on this thing, she had stayed, she was also at that meeting, and she and her little yellow Volkswagen got me home about 3 days later. And I guess the bottom line is that, oddly enough, we had to wait for about 3 hours to cross the bridge from into what bridge do we use, Barb? Not
In the
Detroit.
United States.
Yeah, we came across into the United States, Sarnia, into Port Huron area, and we had a 3-hour wait because of all the trucks that had been held up for 2 days. And we were both going to this Methodist church here, and we were in a disciple Bible study class. And so we're sitting at 3 hours on the bridge doing our disciple Bible study class notes and readings and all this stuff. And somehow or other, it got us through all of that stuff, even, to the point where the customs guys looked at me and went, oh, just go home. But all those little bitty things are true. The other thing is, I have to say, from my advanced years, this afternoon I went to Reverend Colin Amato's Rainbow
Yeah.
Church service. And I have to say, when I think about, from my beginnings in 1975 as my first time being a delegate to a convention, and to going there today, the miracle of this church's growth and outreach and expansion and just doing brand new things in the world is wonderful. So
Beautiful. Thank you,
all
Chris.
there.
Yeah, and just for people who don't know, Colin's ministry is mainly focused on the LGBT community, so that's the progress she's referring to, I think. Great. Any other questions?
I just have a question. I've been thinking about, as you've been speaking, I've been thinking about how miracles are really about being able to notice things. Beauty, notice truth, notice people in your life. And that's when you start to notice miracles. But I guess my question is, there's also a phenomenon of kind of delusions and delusions of grandeur and seeing things that aren't really there, or believing things about yourself or those around you. How do we distinguish between miracles and delusions? And is there like a line as we develop a practice of noticing beauty and truth and love? Are there techniques for being careful around avoiding delusion in it?
Can you give me an example of like the delusion, if you're saying delusions of grandeur?
Yeah, I think that people sometimes, if we have a practice of trying to see signs.
Oh, I see.
That word,
Yeah.
signs, like, oh, that bird is a sign about something, right? Like, it can slip into delusion if we start to make associations and the signs around us that aren't true or that are confirming falsities or, so I'm just curious about that line between noticing signs and maybe seeing things that aren't signs as signs.
Yeah. Did everybody hear the question okay? And sometimes, yes. Okay. So, yeah. So, let me see if I understand the question. I'll say it back to you. There are certain people that when you're talking to them, they'll be like, there was a black bird on my red car, and black bird means this, and the red car means this, and therefore I know I need to go do this. And then there's like every God, and it's usually right. Yes. Yes. And so every conversation with them is like they're speaking in like correspondences that are, but it doesn't quite. You're not sure if this is really correspondences or this is just them talking them, into something. Is that fair? Is that what you're getting at? Yeah, yeah. And there's also the fastest growing churches in the United States are apostolistic. Am I saying it right? Apostolic Reformation Church, which is a Pentecostal church. And in the Pentecostal church, every person can stand up at any time with a divine message for the group. So people, and then they have these divine messages now where certain neighborhoods are demonic and certain neighborhoods are heavenly, and it's a very, but everybody's an expert, because anybody can stand up and say, "Well, God told me this, so we've got to go do this." So I think to your point is, so when we're looking for signs, I think people can see the wrong signs. And the only answer I have for that is that the toughest part of our spiritual life is to examine our motives. It really doesn't matter what we tell people our motives are. It really matters what they truly are in our deepest self. Like what are we really trying to do? If we are really trying in our deepest self to follow the Lord, then the angels that come to us and the signs that come to us will be protected and straightforward. But if we're in delusion and our motivations are not necessarily pure, but there's like the ego or, like you said, delusions of grandeur, I think we're opening ourselves up to the dark forces, and they also will tell us that there are signs. And that's all the only so the only way I could really answer that about like what signs are what is you can generally tell a tree by its fruit, as scripture says. So you can kind of see, are the people that are saying this operating in love? Is there more compassion in their life? Are they more forgiving? Is that bird on the car that made them, whatever the strange set of symbols, could be true, could be right for them? Are we seeing that manifest? Are they more, or is it kind of more toward narcissism, which I generally experience when those people talk to me? And it's almost like a spiritual bypass that they're justifying what they want to do through signs and looking for it. And I think it can then lead to people with mental illness have approached me about signs and so forth. And there's all question about where the dark forces engage in that, in like Van Dusen, Wilson Van Dusen's books about mental health, and that you can get really pulled into that. So I guess fundamentally, one, for us, we always have to pray, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace and make me as clean and um, purposeful and loving and kind as possible. That's what I'm working toward. Doesn't mean we're gonna even get there in this life, but that's the goal. And then so I think that's for us about seeing signs. And I don't know if it's that hard to see the difference. I think when we're dealing with other people with that, it's generally by their fruits. And I would say the fruits of this phenomena of churches where people are all downloading and everybody's sharing is uh, right now it's directly connected to Christian nationalism in the United States. So that's the fruits of that I'm not trying to pick on that faith, but when I watch it and I watch it how it plays out in life, I say that is not how I would see my interpretation of what love and compassion is. Does that answer it? Yeah. Um, and then either Craig or Katie or one of the kids.
Reverend Tafel, thank you. This is Craig. I just wanted to mention that I really appreciate your perspective on that particular topic of the signs, and kind of wanted to add to both you and Dr. Esterson's conversation here about some of the most compelling parts as I've been reading some of Swedenborg's books have been talking about the sense that there's basically two aspects to it that to me help to identify, is this God's sign or is it our own ego, so to speak, that is seeing these occurrences? And one is that it's always that it is good and true. As long as there is good and truth in it, is that enough to say, yes, this is something that should be happening or is being directed by the divine? Is where our good and truth coming from it in some way? And the other is whether or not we take ownership of it as an individual, or if we see it as God working through us. Because I feel like that the dark side of that occurs when we feel some sense of ownership over it to the point where we feel some sense of entitlement or even selection due to it, as opposed to just seeing it as God's divine will working through our ourselves and our environment.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love it. I was trying to get there. I think you were much more concise and clear in saying that. So I really appreciate that, Craig. And thanks for your insights on that. Robert?
Thanks. Not a question, not a sermon, just to thank you for lifting up the link between miracle as an event of transformation, and not so much this, stupendous, unusual natural event that's taking place, but in fact, a significant change taking place. And I guess I do have a comment. Swedenborg reminds us that we're all born with the natural perspective. We interpret everything as in terms of the external world and how it's affecting us, good or bad. But as we grow spiritually, and many people do, we let go of that need to depend upon external verification for our faith and begin to trust our inner life and listen to our inner life more. And that's where I think we begin to understand what it means to say that life is a miracle, because natural life contains an awful lot of good things and an awful lot of negative things, including, death, which we cannot get around. But spiritual life shines a light on everything in our lives, making them all a part of, as you said, the greatest miracle, God's providence in helping us to grow our souls and achieve a heavenly life right now. And I do want to share a brief quote from Jack Kerouac with everyone. He says that if you practice kindness all day with everyone, you will realize you're in heaven already. So that's my contribution. And again, thanks for this great topic.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate that. Let's see. There's chat here. Joy talks about that her resilience in her life, that her upbringing as a Swedenborgian has really been a miracle in her life. And I believe Joy is up for ordination in the UCC church very soon, and so we congratulate her on that. And we're glad that she has that resilience, and we're glad that she's here on Sundays. And then Natalie says, "Thank you for the sermon. I agree with your interpretation of life as miraculous in its very nature, as well as your active participation in God's work." Well, of course you do, Natalie, because you wrote a whole book on it. And I've just plugged your book today, and you've got it figured out. You are like a miracle translator. And then Chris just follows up on her comments that story with the ankles, that it also, the miracle of it also was a time to reflect, and that she got a quiet time and listening in addition to that. So, and I think that's often the case, to Robert's point, that as you grow in your spiritual life, then things start to become, you hopefully you evolve, and you don't need that outward display. You have that inner display, and that also you begin to see, boy, this is not what I wanted. And then you ask, so what am I being taught? And that's a flip that you can make as you grow spiritually. At the beach this summer with my one of my great nephews, sitting on the beach. That's when we do our ask ask Rich the big question. He was just saying, I just don't believe any of the stuff about faith or God or whatever. And this is like the most lovely spiritual kid in the world. And so I said, that's great. That's what you should be at your age. You should be questioning. You can't hurt your faith. And so I think there is a trajectory through our lives where we start off, we do need to kind of question and then grow. And then as we get older, it the more we engage in the spiritual life as we get older, we really can, as Robert was saying, you get into a point you're not looking for that. I don't need a dramatic sign right now. I'm all in, and that's a great spiritual growth, which is really the purpose of life. Other questions?
I have a quick testimony and a question. This week I saw a real miracle. A friend's mother ended up in ICU with sepsis, and she was really at the deathbed, but through prayer and of course medical intervention, she survived and is now appearing to do well. So praise be to God for that. My question has to do with this. Jesus often spoke with a sense of authority and a real sense of power in his faith, including when he performed miracles. And that sort of shocked some people. To what extent do we emulate that sense of control and authority? Or is that something only Jesus could really do in putting his faith to action?
Well, I think it's thanks for the testimony. That's good news. I love hearing healing stories. And then the question about, let me see if I understand the question properly. I think you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, Jesus had a real authority when he's doing healings and a command of the situation and a confidence. And was that just for Jesus because Jesus is God in human form? Or is that something we can emulate? Should we have confidence? Should we have authority? Is that a fair summary?
100%, yes.
Okay. Well, what I'd say about that is it's a bit tricky. And that is that one, I think humility is probably one of the most crucial aspects of spiritual growth for us. So, getting back to having delusions of grandeur we talked about earlier, I think that we should just be really aware that we have a tendency to see ourselves in the best light, not see our faults, and we tend to see the faults of others very clearly. And if just they would change, the world would be fine. And so humility and reflecting on ourselves, Jesus is always saying, take the log out of your own eye. Look at your if you haven't sinned, you throw the first stone. So Jesus is all about teaching us that spiritual growth is self-reflection. It starts with being very aware and being aware of your shadow side, being aware of your sin. That's why we do confession. So get clear on that. Now, that doesn't preclude having authority or confidence. In fact, I think one thing that is misunderstood for Christians is I think we're sometimes too meek and mild in our imitation of Christ in a world that we sometimes need to be very confident and, yes, aggressive and speak with authority. But in that, baked into that, has to be some humility that we're doing the best we can with what we have. And when it shifts when our authority and our confidence shifts into judging other people, we're in the wrong lane. Okay. But when that confidence and authority is, it's time to stop playing. I need to step into my life. I need to step out of the shadows. I need to stop playing so meek and mild. Because in our world today, there's a lot of aggressive, confident people, and they're stepping forward and they're filling our civil life. They're leading our business life. They're leading our nonprofit life. They're leading our churches, and not all for the good. It's a hubris-based leadership model. And so Swedenborg has a line in there about politicians where he says God often has to work through the politicians that exist because really good people are not drawn to that. They don't have the ego for it, right? So I think we actually need to develop our egos and step up in those situations a little bit more, and not vacate the square to people with selfish narcissism. But we have to do it purely, and that's the challenge. And it's that same challenge we were talking about earlier. Is that helpful? Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rich.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, or concerns? We're at time for shifting to prayer. So we will thank you all for your questions, comments, concerns. You are all miracles. And thank you for being here on this sermon.